Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina. This is the maturing of our science that can be done, and Doug Kostewicz.
It is so powerful to be able to convey numbers rather than the subjective nature of words.
For thought-provoking conversation. Hey everybody, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hello everyone, and welcome to Season 5 of ABA On Call. Doug, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and Happy New Season to you.
Season 5, amazing. Let's
I
go.
know, I'm ready.
Let's not
I'm
even
ready.
pump people up. Let's just go.
Let's just do it.
We were talking about, we have this 3-part series going. This is part 2 of 3. And we're using this information about graphing, visual analysis, quantitative analysis. And the hook is, do you want to 10x your clinical and research outcomes? And we're showing people how to do that.
Right.
Last time we talked about level, we talked about visual analysis, quantitative analysis. And today in this episode, we're going to talk about trend. Well, let's talk about trend. And what I want to do here is start off and just answer the question, well, what is trend? So, Doug, what is trend?
Trend. Let's see. Well, as we take repeated measures of something, it's plotted on a line series or a line graph. It's where that behavior is going over time. So is it changing? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? And when, as you see here, when you lay a line on top of that, it's the general direction which that is changing, even though some of the dots may be below the line, some of the dots may be above the line. It's generally where it's going.
Yeah. So we have a slide up that has 2 definitions. One is trend and one is trend line. A trend is simply, hey, something's going this direction. It's trending upward. It's trending downward. We put a line on that direction, and then we're going to make some kind of value statement. Traditionally, this is how people do it. They'll say, if it's going up, they'll talk about it being low, medium, or high, or some words that get at that. That's trend.
Right.
And if I said, what's the utility of trend? What would be some answers in terms of how we use trend and what does it do for us?
Well, as you see on the slide here, it's the picture of behavior change. So if the trend is decreasing or going down, that means less behavior is happening that you're measuring each time that you've measured across those days, minutes, weeks, whatever that unit of time is. So in this instance, it was 20, then it was 18, then it was 17, and so on. So it's decreasing. It's just that overall picture of where it's going.
And that's pretty valuable in terms of clinical work. You want to know, well, what the heck is happening to this behavior? Is it flat? And if it's flat, this gets back to level. If it's at a really high level, then maybe we need to intervene. And if we have a kid who's swearing in class, and if it's at 0 and flat, hey, we don't need to do anything. But if it's at 10 or 20 and flat, we got to do something. But if it's trending upward or downward, that's telling us something. So here, trend means something to us. And I guess that gets into the second part of why we might use trend. And that is, we have some kind of goal.
Right.
And which way are we moving? Are we moving towards the goal? Are we moving away from the goal? And what do we do with that information?
So if you have something that you want to reduce and the trend is going up, well, we need to intervene or do something. If we want it to reduce and it's already reducing, we can look at it and say, well, is it getting there fast enough, or is it so much of a problem? So it's all related to not just where it's going, but where it is going in relation to some other aspect of that behavior. What we want it to see.
Doug, if we stop right now, what we could say is for a within condition, in other words, you're in baseline, you're in intervention. This is pretty much what everyone does. Like, I don't know that we're sharing anything that's mind-blowing here. You're like, wow, okay, you're not telling me anything I haven't heard or don't know of.
Right. Well, the one thing I would see, sometimes there's not that stated goal or something, but there's generally, I have a behavior, it's a distracting, it's a challenging behavior, we want to reduce it. We have an alternative behavior, we want to increase it. We're going to look to trend in each of these conditions to see what's happening as to decision making.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Maybe people have goals. Sometimes there's just a general sense, let's just get it higher or lower. People might not have that goal. And I guess in terms of research, we could also say that there might not be a goal. You might just want to analyze what the heck's going on. Okay. Now, here's something that I'd like to add to it, and that is, how about quantifying trend?
So
we can do this.
We talked about this a little bit last week. The words that we use, such as increasing, but we end up using words, subjective words, such as higher, lower, increasing, decreasing, increasing quickly. That is a whole changeover to move to a number and then understanding what that number is in relation. So when you see a divide by 1.34, that's very different than saying it's decreasing. And that number is, in and of itself, could be a goal to shoot for.
That's right. We're going to talk in the next segment a lot about what does this mean when we quantify this number, but this is another use of trend. Now, this would be number 3. And there's another one we could look at. And this, it wouldn't be considered within comparison or within condition. This would be between conditions. Now, I'm assuming you've done research where you've engaged in comparing trend between conditions.
Right. And if we're talking earlier, then we're looking at 2 lines now. One is decreasing and one looks to be decreasing more. So we see a more of a decrease. So things, whatever that condition was, made things go down, and the trend also went down. But we're still limited to the words lower or higher at this point.
Yeah. Another piece of use for trend, and this becomes so important when we're doing comparisons. Maybe you're working with a client and insurance is paying for it, and that insurance company wants to know, okay, what was the trend when before and what's with the trend after? Is it moving in the right direction? Is it steeper? Is it better? And that is incredibly important in the applied world, but yet it also, in terms of research, this is bread and butter. When we have A/B designs, or even any of our designs, when we go from one to the other, we have a comparison. Let me cue this up for the last one. And this is our last, there's probably more, but I just came up with 5 quick uses. And that is looking at what's going to happen in the future.
Right. And so when you plot it as such, if we don't make a change, where is this going to keep going, right? And when you lay down that line, so earlier we saw an aim or a goal, we're kind of, is it moving towards that goal? But also you can think about dotting out that line and seeing, is that where we want it to go? And projecting, if we don't change anything and we keep everything the same, this is where it's likely to go.
This has implications for so much. Just like you were saying, which way is this go? It's forecasting. And there's so much math. When I was doing a little bit of research for the show, and I was looking at forecasting, and people use forecasting models, and what they talk about are, how are you plotting the line to your data, or using linear regression. And so there's all of this stuff that gets really complicated. But for us, we had this graph, we put our data on it, and then we're simply saying, okay, if we don't do anything, what's going to happen? And the implications are, that tells me if I'm on the right track, but it also matters for when we do those comparative analyses. If it was going up and we wanted our data to go up, and then it starts to go down, that we start talking about the logic, our baseline logic, and how all of that's important. I think it's time for a secret word, Doug.
Well, I will give secret word number 1, and that secret word is trend.
Thank you for the secret word, Doug. Let's move on to our next section. And this is, when we talk about 10xing, this is maybe a little technical here, but I want to talk about, there's two things that we can quantify. We said in the last time we were talking that you could quantify trend, and there's two ways to do it. That is, if you're using a linear graph or if you're using a ratio graph. So if you're using a linear graph, then maybe you'll remember, and our listeners will remember rise over run. Remember how you used to have to calculate y equals mx plus b. It's just the slope of the line. So I'm showing, for those of you who aren't seeing it, I'm showing a graph. And what I do behind that graph, I'm imposing a grid that shows how, if you go over one to the right wait a minute. It would be one to the right on my graph, and you go up one, that's the way it's going to be. This grid shows you how to calculate, how you can quantify slope. So if you went over 1 and you went up 3, then this formula simply takes 3 over 1. And if you did the math behind that, what's 3 divided by 1? It's 3. That means the slope value is 3. If I said to you, Doug, on a linear graph, what's a slope value of 3 mean to you? What would you say?
It means it looks like every session you do 3 more.
Yeah. I mean, this is not at all common. This is something that when you throw this number out there, it's tough to interpret. So m equals 3. I just have another example on here. So if you went over 2 and you went up 1, you're looking at the increase in the vertical, the increase in the horizontal. So that is 1 over 2. So that means the slope value is 1/2. Again, if we share that number with people, you can technically quantify slope, and this is how you do it. Here's a question. How many times in your professional life, in all the journals have you read, have you seen an article that has actually quantified slope in this way?
No.
Have you ever? I never either. Like, not one time in my entire professional career have I seen it. It can be done, but
it's not used
unless you and I are missing it.
It's not used as a decision-making tool.
Yeah. or even a descriptive
Right.
tool. It's just not used. We just flatly use words. Okay, let's turn this around, and let's talk about quantifying slope on a ratio graph.
Okay. So now, when you can see the listeners can see, or the watchers can see, that this data is plotted on a ratio graph. Now, there's a lot different mathematics. That's a line of that's a linear regression line that's been plotted. But what you see is a celeration value of that line of times 1.6. Now, what that means is every week you're seeing 60% improvement. So it times 1.6. So it's almost easier sometimes to use it times 2. So if something's doubling each week, that would mean it's a times 2 celeration, or 100% improvement. And that's very different than the slope that we mentioned earlier, such as 3, right? Every day we get 3 more. Well, now every week your behavior is doubling when you produce celeration, which mathematically is behavior over time over time. So that adds 2 aspects of time. So you are getting a percentage increase. Now, flipping that over, you divide. So if something's a divide by 2, that means it's halving, 50% less. It's halving each week. And that's a big deal. Rick, that is an amazing amount of information contained in a few digits.
Yeah. I would point out, I want to pick up on something you said earlier, and that is, you said if it were times 2 or 1.6, it was improving. Not necessarily improving. It depends on what kind of data you have.
It's accelerating.
If you have decel data and it's going up by times 2, you wouldn't say that's improving. It's growing. Right. It's doubling.
Right.
This is the power of this descriptive number. It gives us the magnitude of how fast something is changing. And we talked about this last time with level, and this number, maybe let's just take maybe we just take a few minutes and just discuss instances where, what does this number mean, and what's an example of that?
So I think back to all the stuff I've worked with kids reading, and when you see kids that are producing times 2 corrects, right? Times 2 corrects, that means that they are doubling their behavior each week. That's not a linear improvement. That's exponential improvement. And so I don't say that they're improving. I don't say that they're have a steep slope. Everything is contained in saying their corrects are at times 2 acceleration, and that conveys all the information I need. That's a behavior I want to see increase, and so when they're moving it, at times 2 is amazing speed of change.
Reading, you gave an example. Anything with academics, we can put a number to it and say, this is where it's at. This is how fast it's either growing. Mm-hmm. If it's flat, we call that a times 1. That means there's 0% change. Mm-hmm. Anything you multiply by itself is going to stay the same. And the closer you are to 1, the less magnitude of change you have. This is, well, I keep wanting to jump ahead to the next section to talk about the implications of this, but I'll pull back and just maybe give some other examples. was thinking about a chart share that I attended once. By the way, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, in the precision teaching world, people do something called chart shares where they have these charts and they share what they found. So literally, they have a chart and they're sharing what it is. And this person had a self-injurious behavior, and it was decaying. It was going down. It was, again, talking about decay versus decrease. Now, those are differences. Decrease is the word you use on a linear graph. Decay is the word you use on a ratio graph. Divide by 1.8. And I was astounded because this person was new to charting and really didn't understand the magnitude of what that divide by 1.8 meant. And divide by 2, as you were talking about earlier, anything that could be having itself every week, that's incredible. And this person had something that was pretty close to that, and that was significant.
Mm-hmm. It is so powerful, as we'll get to talk about in a little bit, to be able to convey numbers rather than the subjective nature of words, because then those numbers have play across everything rather than thinking about just this study or my client in isolation of increasing or decreasing. That doesn't provide, as we mentioned last episode, we mentioned with regards to level, how those numbers can be outside of the individual, just like these rates of acceleration or decay in relation to that behavior for other individuals as well. So it's very powerful to be able to quantify, and it's a meaningful number that, unlike slope, appears in the literature.
Yes. With that, you've brought us up to our second secret word, which is slope. How do we make things 10 times better with either clinical outcomes or research outcomes? This is what we've been building up to. I don't even know where to begin. No. We could spend hours talking about this. I get so excited when I think about this, but I'm going to throw the ball over to you, Doug, and just give me one thing that jumps out, either clinical or research. If we are now quantifying our slope with celeration, which I will say everywhere, if you're using a standard chart, then that times 2 is going to be times 2 no matter what. Those numbers are going to be the same no matter what. What do you see as something that would be incredibly valuable?
Well, I go back to, what do you get with a trend line on a linear chart? You get a line. And you can show, given whatever you do to that chart, you could show a gain of 1 or 2 a day, and you're going to see a nice straight line, right? And it'll be, if it's something you want to improve, it'll improve. You put that same data on a ratio chart, and you're going to get minuscule, where you'll initially get gains, but you will see that thing curve and flatten out, and it will make a much clearer decision that what you thought was something that was improving or increasing, in reality, is actually not doing what you think it is. And it's not making a meaningful change for the individual that you're working with, which will then in turn make you make a change faster, realizing that that isn't a very good change. It's actually minute. And unless there's some socially valid reason to have it that small, you can do something else and make a change just based on trend and versus acceleration.
I'm going to pick up on what you're putting down. and that is the clinical significance, the social significance of a number.
Mhm.
The number that you have is, you can actually say, we could do this as a field. We could say, you know what's socially significant? Times 1.3 or greater
Mhm.
growth, or something like that. We could say that. We would literally have a number that says this degree of change is socially significant or clinically significant. And we can't do that now.
Or I'll take you.
So
You
you
know,
want
I'm
to
going
talk
to take it
about
one
something
step
that,
further. I'm going to interrupt you. And I'm going to take it one step further. What if you're able to
yeah,
say this batch of interventions, you're going to get a times 1.8 to a times 2 growth for these kids? If you use this batch of interventions, you're going to get a times 1 times 1.1 to a times 1.25. This one's going to decrease it by 50%. This one's going to decrease it by 20%. You can be a more informed decision maker on what you're using when it's basically showing you what effect it's going to have over what time, rather than relying on this will make it better, this will make it a little bit better, this one makes it a tiny bit better.
and there's a big maybe around what you said,
Okay?
Doug, because when people are saying this will make it better, this won't make it better, a lot of that's based on the graphs that they've
I know.
manipulated to tell us this makes it
Yeah.
better. And like, I was reviewing an article once, and someone, well, I probably shouldn't give too many details on it, but basically someone was trying to make a case to what like you were talking about. And I just shot back and said, look, I get it that in an ideal world, that would be great. But because we have so many problems with graphical manipulation, those numbers are almost meaningless. It's really hard to say, but that's another
Yeah.
conversation. The excitement that I'm getting from what you're saying is two things. It's super exciting on the clinical side, because what if we lived in a world where you had these numbers that said, okay, if you do response cost, here's the range of what that's going to give you. But the other side that's exciting is on the researcher side. Why all of our researchers, just think how excited they would be if they were doing their research and they actually had a number that spit back a learning rate or a change rate, call it what you will, a valid number that said, you did this intervention, here's how fast the behavior changed.
All right. So I'm going to come back and say, if you start to use these numbers, here's another clinical thing that you can gain from using celeration. You can take celebrations. We've been limiting it to within conditions. When you look at between conditions, there are metrics, very simple metrics, that allow you to quantify the change in celeration. And if you have multiple celebrations, you can quantify those within relationships conditions. So if you've got a behavior you want to decay or decelerate versus one you want to accelerate, you can quantify and pull a number. So you begin to distill these very important behaviors down to numbers that can just trigger when you need to make a change. Value the change you made. Keep going. And that influences our decision making so that we don't go out on a limb and guess as much as we would if we have those numbers available to us.
Doug, you're feeding me chocolate.
I don't, and you don't even like chocolate from what I've heard.
This is the maturing of our science that can be done. And that's always the line that we walk. We're not saying what people do is bad. Like, there are some bad things we can do when you're stretching out the axes to make it look like that's bad. But if you're using a linear graph and you're reporting that, hey, it's going up, that's not bad. That's just not as good as it could be. And this is where the nuance is. if you put that number on there and you have these between condition changes, you can now go to an insurance company and say, here's a metric, and this is where the person was. Based off my intervention, this is how much faster they're learning. And that's what that number would tell you. Or if it's a social behavior that you wanted to reduce, to decay, you could say the same thing. And that, I feel, is something that we must do as a field. And we said, how do you 10x outcomes? Having those numbers, having the ability to go into someone and clearly show them the magnitude of change that you produced, that's got to be at least 10 times or more better than the way people are doing it now.
It has to be. And it actually gives you so much more confidence to make decisions if you're using these types of metrics. That's not to say numbers are the be-all, end-all. You've got to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. But if you've taken your data with fidelity and you're shooting for socially valid goals with your client, but you're placing that data on a measurably superior display, using these metrics enhances everything that you're doing, that you're already doing well with them. You know what? Try it for yourself.
Yeah. That, hopefully we've inspired some people who haven't done this to try it themselves. Yeah. The way we're talking about in this series, we talked about level last time. We're talking about trend this time. Next episode, we'll talk about variability. It's important too to understand that all of these work in concert with one another. If all you ever do is look at, let's say that you had a trend that was growing at times 1.2, and you said, oh boy, that's kind of slow. And then you did an intervention and it was still growing at times 1.2. If you just compared those numbers by themselves, you might say, yeah, what's the significance there?
And I'm going to answer your question. We talked about it last week.
Ahead.
What if you increase the level by a times 10?
Right.
So now you're quantifying that level change, but you're realizing I'm not changing the speed at which it's happening, but I've increased that level by times 10, which fits into the theme of a times 10 decision maker. So yeah, so, and we'll see, to keep everyone on their toes, we'll see how variability plays into this role in our third installment.
Yes. We're up to our third secret.
Okay. It's going to be celeration.
Beautiful. We have 3 amazing secret words.
And make sure that you don't autocorrect it to celebration.
Right. Oh, how many times does that happen?
Yes, it does. It happens all the time. So I get a celebration line of times 2, which is pretty cool because it's the new year, celebration. But no, the secret word is celeration.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you for your time, listeners. Thank you for joining us for another season, season 5. We wouldn't be here without you. Wishing you a happy new year from Doug, producer Karen. Thank you. Have a great new year. And we appreciate you joining us on ABA On Call.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call. To get your CEU, follow the link and instructions below the video. You can enjoy the program again there, or you can go straight to the attendance verification quiz. Just enter the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate.